This is Ryan Thomas Neese.
And this is Nicole Neese.
And this is the Closer Podcast. Welcome to the Closer Podcast.
Episode 12.
Episode 1-2.
112.
Cut.
Episode 12.
And we were noticing recently, we went out on a double date with some friends maybe 30 days or so ago. And just had a really excellent time.
Excellent.
Did we not?
It was so good.
What did we like about it? And then we're going to kind of say what it sort of caused us to think about and what I think we want to talk about today.
Okay. What did we like about it? Is that what your question was? Well, all of it. I liked all of it. I liked the dinner where we went was great. The food was excellent. The company, the conversation, the vibe between us and them. Anyone who's in a pairing knows that often when you have couple friends, more often than not, at least, one of you is taking it for the team. Like there is maybe one other person in the duo that doesn't just jive as well, and it's doable, but it's not as exciting. And this was not that. This was, I love both of these people. We get along with them really well. Both of us do.
Yeah.
And they're delightful to be around.
Yeah.
So all of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we think this is, you say anybody who's in a pairing, I mean, you think it's that way. We don't actually know whether other people report this to you sort of
Yeah.
thing.
People say that to me all the time.
Yeah. That sort of when they go out, one of the two of them feels really sort of like connected, but the other one not so much.
Yeah.
Sort of like if you and I hang out and we're hanging out with let's say a man and a woman, that you might feel really connected to the woman and I might really feel connected to the woman like her, but we either sort of jointly don't care for the guy or you don't care for the guy or you feel connected to the woman, which is great. And I like her too, but I don't like the guy.
Right.
Sort of thing.
Yes. Any of those combinations.
Any number of those combos. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of ways for it to kind of go astray. And because we had such a great time that night, and I really did too, same things, there's some stuff we have in common with them. Actually, a lot that is not terribly in common.
Right.
We are roughly the same age, though the gentleman, there's a bigger gap. He's a little bit older than us. But it really is something about the ease of the back and forth.
Yes.
And you're not constantly offset or thrown off rather by they're like about every couple of sentences they say something that you're like, wait, what? No, I don't think that at all. And it isn't about just looking for a reflection per se of like what you think kind of thing that like, but more just like that every couple of minutes you're not noticing some massive like, wait a minute, what are you guys talking about? Or, I mean, sometimes it is like a really strong dissonance around a point of, where you lack commonality or something.
Yeah,
so maybe it is something partially just listening, or rather looking for reflection some of the time.
Yeah, and I think some of it is that, and then there is this part of you just don't have to try very hard. And I think that's the thing that in adult friendships, especially because we've moved enough as a couple, that when we're making new friends, I'm like, oh, some people I have to try a lot harder to be friends. Like, and that doesn't mean that the friendship isn't good. I just have to try a lot harder. And I don't feel like I have to try. We didn't have to try with this couple, and that was really nice.
Yes, and this is what I'm kind of trying to unpack right away, is like, what do we mean by try? And that's where I'm saying, like, it is that some people, when I hang out with them, we're tooting along and everything's good, and then they'll say something, and it isn't just that you sort of like don't agree or find it on the far end, maybe you find it objectionable or something, or offensive or something, but it's often not that. It's like a real point of non-commonality and non-identification. I don't identify with what you're saying. And then maybe on top of it is that you really, with certain couples, you really don't feel the latitude to say that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, where you feel as though if you brought it up, if you're like, I know what you're saying. I don't think that I think that, like, maybe what I think is,
Yeah.
and that you sort of can't do that even.
Yes.
So it's because, of course, when you're hanging out with other people, you're going to have tons of lack of commonality in certain areas or
Right.
domain specific. But you at least feel that there is enough like intellectual and emotional or relational flexibility on the part of the other people that you can bring it up, and that it's not going to like, go over poorly.
Or even just like stunt the conversation. I think sometimes you bring it up, and if it goes, one of the ways of it going over poorly, I guess, is that they're just quiet. Or they don't know how to respond.
Yeah.
And then you're like,
the conversation
awkward
tapers.
pause.
Yeah, right. And it isn't that I think we need there to be continual conversation. I'm all for like pauses in the conversation where you are sort of out and just able to reflect that, like, oh, what a nice night we're having, and kind of be within your own mind, or maybe you and I start talking and then they start talking. But it's that, there's a continual, maybe that's one of the things then, is that there's a continual funneling of a conversation where it keeps being pinched off. You keep like conversation, and then bam, a swing and a miss, and it closes down. And there's only, just being honest, there's only so many of those that you can take in a night before you get done and you're like, wow, we were working at that.
Yeah.
So the other night we had this hangout and it was so great, and we walked away, and one of the reflections we had on the way home was like how much we like them, and had such a great time. And then rather immediately we're like, oh, I wonder if they feel the same way. And it's a little self-conscious maybe, or something like, oh, are we as likable as we experience them as being?
Yeah.
And we just thought there was something here to be talked about. Like, isn't it interesting that here we are at this phase of our lives, and not just that we're sort of hungry for connection, which I think of as being relatively continual throughout our lifetimes, and certainly our lifetime together, though it ebbs and flows in how you experience that. And I think that about where we're at right now, like the hunger that I have currently relationally is different than the one I had, 10 years ago for sure, 20 years ago for sure. But just that it exists, and also that there is a certain vulnerability in it, to use a word that I've been using a lot, that is one of the threads that I pull on a lot. It's like, oh, isn't it interesting that like there's a kind of a want there, not just that we hunger to be in a relationship, but also that once you start one, you're kind of like, ooh, like, are we cool? Like, are we likable? And I would like to report that in this case, we got a text message from them the next day being like, hey, we sure did have a great time last night.
It's like, they like me. They really like me. Yes. Yeah.
And again, the thing that we did there was not so much like, oh yeah, we were cool, but more like, oh, it was so gratifying that they returned that same sort of sentiment to us. And I think the next time that I saw her, we hugged each other and she said what a great time that she had that night again, and reiterated it. And then actually the next time we saw him, which wasn't until just maybe a week or so ago. So it had been, 2-3 weeks since and he reiterated again, which was just really nice to feel. But there's just a lot around that, and you experience it differently across the life of our relationship, which is now not quite 20 years old.
Yeah. And I think what made me want to sort of talk about this was thinking about how in each of the stages of our relationship, we've lived in different places. We've been in Nashville, we've been in Virginia, we've been in Missouri / Illinois, and now here in California. And, our stint in Nashville was very short. We were there for a small amount of time. We were single. We got married there, and we moved almost right away, right? But every place after that, until we landed here in California, was a place that you had previously lived. So you had sort of a built-in community that we could step into when we were there. And I always was experiencing myself as making new friends, and whether they were your old friends and partners adjacent, or trying to just find my own crew of people. And so now in San Diego, well, I definitely do have friends here from my past. We don't really hang out with them. So,
Yeah, we don't.
But it's the first time you have had to make a complete new friend group since we've been a couple.
Yeah.
And I'm just super curious what that's like for you, because in almost 20 years, this is the first time.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a lot in there. There's you're reflecting on the different experiences we've had living in different places over the course of our relationship. Mm-hmm. And what I hear in there as well that I didn't hear you say is also how we experienced trying to make couple friends together.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
which is sort of what we were just talking about. And then there's also us as individuals making friends.
Yeah.
And again, not something that you hear talked about as such a lot, at least I don't.
Yeah.
Making friends as an adult and what that's like.
Yeah.
And it's always sort of couched in more like phase of life.
Right.
Rather than just I'm an adult and I'm out here trying to make friends.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, making friends after divorce, or
Right.
Sometimes it is making friends in a new area, or it's, making friends as a single, making friends as a couple. But there's a lot of domains in there, and we've had a lot of experiences across our relationship. So where should we start then?
Yeah. I guess the part that I'm most curious about is, because you're saying you haven't heard it a ton. People talk about what it's like to make friends as an adult. I feel like this is a common, that when I bring it up to other people, they're like, oh yeah, it is hard, especially if you've moved. If you're a transplant and you've not been somewhere in the same place and you've not had the same friends since were in college. It can be hard to try and find people who are like-minded. And
yeah. So here's what I'm experiencing right now. You're bringing this up, and then you pitched it to me a minute ago, and I didn't pick it right up.
Yeah.
But I'm experiencing that you actually want to talk about this, about what your experience has been. Because here's the funny thing. When you asked me a second ago very directly, I'm really curious about, what it's like for you now. I kind of don't. I'm going to talk about it with you, but I kind of don't have a big need to talk about it. I haven't experienced it as much of anything, super disruptive, super not disruptive. But there's interesting little nuggets in there to talk about, which I can. But I'm sort of thinking okay, what I'm hearing first as maybe a backdrop, and maybe that will help me reflect in areas that seem relevant to us, is what your experience has been. Because you've said this before, separate from a talking point for a podcast that we want to share with others, you said to me, this thing that you said, everywhere we go, we've been somewhere. We were in Nashville together, as people who've heard episodes 8 and 9, our origin story, have heard us sort of say at length, and we both were transplants there. And we were single together, back and forth for a second, before, getting engaged and then married. And we did actually kind of have individual friend groups there. You moved with your best friend and were living with her.
Right.
And you guys, had your own community and connection that sort of built up around you and the decisions you made and the places you hung out at. And then I kind of had my own, which partially intersected with yours, was actually driven by some other connections that I had.
Right.
then we leave together and we go to Virginia where, right, I had gone to school, graduate school there. I sort of had a pretty long-standing run there. I mean, I was there from like the time I left home, basically, at like 18, 19. I think I was about 19 when I left. And I was there all the way till... I was there for about 10 years, and then I came to Nashville with you. We were there for, a very short time, and then we were back again. And so then there was another like 5 years.
Yeah.
But I guess as we returned, I had been there for like about a decade.
Yeah.
Not quite.
Not quite. Yeah.
And so I did have a friend group there.
Yeah.
It wasn't like I had gobs and gobs of friends. I had a couple of close ones. And then I had communities that like I was a part of that we connected to.
Right.
Religious, spiritual community, kind of like I just knew people around the community. Maybe that's a larger factor, is that I knew how to access things. I kind of like understood the culture there.
Right.
I understood who you wanted to talk to and how you dialed in. And a lot of it was foreign and bleh to me. Like I just did not love my time in Central Virginia. Beautiful area of the country, very unique to me culturally. A stone's throw from Washington, D.C., a stone's throw from Charlottesville in Northern Virginia, and all of the sort of interesting, fascinating, just dripping with U.S. history. And that leaves an imprint on that area. Culturally, and then the fact that Central Virginia versus Northern identifies itself as like the South, and I'm very much a original Midwesterner at heart. I found that to be bizarre, and not bizarre like ew necessarily, but bizarre like this is foreign to me.
Yeah.
So you come from California by way of Nashville. What was it like there, stepping into my previous access, my friends, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, it was the things. It was an interesting I used to say that it was sort of like Twilight Zone-y a little bit, in that like all these sort of stereotypical things that I would think of a small town might have, they had them, and then they would have outliers. But it was a very small area. A lot of people knew everybody. Yeah,
I think the town that we lived in was about 80,000 people, maybe.
Yeah.
And a big portion of that was the college base that was there. Probably 15 to 18 of that was the college influx, and then another probably 5 or 8 that, comprised... Or, maybe another couple that comprised employees and so forth. And then certainly you had a base of another 10 or 20,000 that probably went to college there. And there were like 5 schools there. It was sort of interesting how many schools
it was a small area, and there wasn't a ton to do.
Yeah.
It was, I was newly married, but also I was a new parent. And that was, that presented its own challenges. I wasn't working. I was home full time. So the communities I might find friends on my own that weren't people connected to you, became very small. I mean, it was basically the gym.
Yeah. Just like no real bustling nightlife. It was the type of town where, most things are shut down by 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
And, and we were, not yet 30, so we were still interested. And the things that were open past 10 o'clock tended to be like, relatively humble, and not that we weren't the same back then. I mean, we were flat broke and trying to make our way in the world. But, it having moved away from Nashville, which was not then what it is now, though it was on its way. Still a very big city at the time.
Yeah.
It felt like a real kind of step down, and there was a certain, you're right, a certain small townedness to it. So how did that impact the friendship piece?
I think it was just there was a smaller pool of people to pick from to say, well, do we jive? Do we not? And so thus began my first real experience with going, oh, well, I can't just, if it doesn't work here, go to a new place and find someone else. It was kind of like, well, I have a few people, and I did connect with a few women there. But it was hard being a young mom and newly married. The friends that I did make were single women. And our lifestyle was different because they had more flexibility because they didn't have a kiddo. And so it was just like, it was an interesting experience. It was hard because all of my other friends always sort of came out of these groups that I spent a large amount of my alone time with. And so you kind of would spend hours with them and be like, well, of course. What is it? That comedian, Nate, what's his last name?
Bergazzi.
Yeah. He talks about like in your 20s, if the friend calls you up and says you want to go somewhere and doesn't even give you details, you're like, yeah, I'm in, jump in the car and you head there within no details and no plans on when you're going to come home. In your 30s, when they ask you, you go, yeah, but I'm probably going to drive separately. And then in your 40s, you go, I'm not really going to go.
Yeah, right.
So, right. I found myself right on that verge of the 20s into 30s time zone, but they were still at the like, let's go. And I was like, maybe I need to drive separately. And I had different needs at that time. And that was hard as an adult to know how to express that when I hadn't had like previous relationships with them to lean on, you know?
Yeah. What I'm remembering as you're saying it is because you know, when we moved to Missouri, St. Louis as well, you had a similar kind of, I feel like I would call it a complaint.
Yeah.
That you're like, yeah, but what as you're saying this piece, I'm thinking, yeah, this is intimately tied to where you're at as a person as well. And maybe that's something worth sort of noticing aloud, that in making friends as an adult and how that goes, perhaps this is self-obvious, but it is intimately tied to the way that you relate to yourself and sort of where you're at in your own journey. And I think looking back on it, you were used to, yes, your sort of pre-established ways of connecting to things and the ways that supported kind of who you were at the time, which was to say you were good at generally connecting with people, being a part of a group. But when you remove the element of the familiarity you had with the groups you were sort of oriented to, you had a lot of, like you just said it a minute ago, like how do I do this? Like how do I like kind of, I think some of it was determine what my needs are, and then how do I get those met, and then how do I get those met in a way that's realistic. Right. With the group of people that I have access to. Right. And as you begin to evaluate that, you start to go, oh, what do I think about the people that I have access to? And is this really a group I want to connect with? Right. Which is really interesting to think about in the context of where you started, which was this is a really small town. Yeah. And so like you can not hang out with those people if you want, but A, you're probably going to see them a lot. Yeah. And B, you may not have much else of a choice. I mean, it's not like you're, turning down invites left and right.
Yeah,
we just weren't that established.
I'm a slow burn too. Like it takes me a minute. So
yes, you're a crock pot when it comes to moving.
100%.
And although some of that has changed, but like you are a slower warmer upper to most things.
Yes. And so, I did find a few women there towards the end. We were there for what feels like a hot second. We were there for about 5 years. And so maybe 5 years feels like a long time for some people, but for me, having 2 children in that time span and living in a new area, it took me a minute to sort of connect.
Yeah, and learn, and just gotten married, and so we're working on that.
Yeah, and you did have friends there, and they were a nice stable base as well to be connected to. But then when we left there and we headed back to your, neck of the woods for where you grew up, and being in Missouri, you you also had an established group of friends there. And you were working and you found a new community of people and introduced me to those people as well. But I still was home for a long time. And I started the process all over again. The crock pot was like on warm for a long time. And now I had to like turn it up to hot, but it took a minute to get there. What took me 5 years to accomplish in Virginia, I'm now starting from scratch again in St. Louis.
Yeah. So in 2013, if you guys remember the story, we left Virginia. We had owned a counseling practice there as well with a friend of mine. And we had that for several years. And then he and I both sort of had different ambitions, sort of like, hey, this went pretty dang good. We've got some different ambitions. Let's hang this up. And that's when we moved to St. Louis. And the thinking at that time was sort of, well, we don't have any family in Virginia and very little support. And now with 2 kids in tow, that started to seem more relevant. And right, whereas Virginia, I had just gone to, college and grad school there. I had actually grown up in the St. Louis area.
Yeah.
And so not only did I have my family base there, but I had connections from childhood. I was in the same school system for K through 12. So I had a bunch of friends that, I had the friends that had never moved away. I had the friends that had, gone to college somewhere and moved back.
Yeah.
And then we additionally made peripheral connections to our, fledgling counseling practice that we started and relative to employees and et cetera.
Yeah.
So, but interestingly, I remember you reflecting a lot there that, oh, well, you have friends. And I'm trying to think of what that reflection was concerning. Like some of it was surrounding, like maybe a reflection from you that you were dissatisfied in some way, or at least that's how I was reading it, with your sort of social life and feeling kind of not connected to anyone
Yeah, I think it was like I saw the relationships that you had, and while all of them have always been very sweet and very welcoming and have been good friends to me, it was never like
most of them,
like not a complaint about that per se, but more like wanting to have something that was solely mine, like a friendship that I created that wasn't a reflection of you. That was at the time, I wanted something that wasn't an offshoot of they knew you before, now they're just learning me through you, kind of, right?
Yes, and I remember I'm feeling it as you're saying it. I remember being very frustrated by this, like, not that you wanted that per se, though probably I found that a little frustrating. The, sort of insistence on having a thing that was kind of not organic to the reality that we were living in, that like, oh my gosh, sort of what we just said, like we have this sort of built-in thing here we can access and you're wanting something different.
Yeah.
Maybe something about that was frustrating, but I did understand what you meant. But then I would be like, yeah, but you don't see, because I did also have some new relationships. And I would be like, you don't see how much work I put in to these. Like, I am incredibly intentional. Like, I go out of my way, and when I meet a new friend, I follow up with them the following week. And I tell them, hey, boy, I sure did have a great time last week. Thanks so much for spending time with me. Really enjoyed getting to know you. Would love to do it again, right? And then throughout the weeks that would ensue till I would see them again, if I thought of them or if I thought of something about them that they might be interested in on the basis of our conversation, I would, and dude, this about me. Like when I go after it, I'm like, although I again, here it is again, it shows up differently at this phase.
Yeah.
For me, pursuing new friendships, even in an area where I had old ones, I really undertook it as a very like thing that you have to kind of do all of these things and then you get the connection on the other end. And like, I was always very good at like, and I still think, it's probably consistent with your point of view as well, that I am as it regards like, if I'm thinking about someone, I don't negotiate with myself. I send them a text message and say, hey, I wanted to let you know I was thinking about you. I hope you're doing great. Right? Like I have all these little mini things that are installed in my life. And then I remember looking and being like, babe, you don't do any of these things.
Yeah, well, and I think that sort of leads me to what I'm saying is you are that way. You are very intentional. You do have these things that you do. And I've learned a lot of that from you in terms of how to connect with people in adult friendships. I think this is what I'm saying is that a lot of when I was single, what lent itself to me was the ability to be around people all the time and kind of do that without having to try too hard, because I was just always at events, always at things.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
where
that's what I was
connecting,
saying before. You
right?
you would like lean on the infrastructure.
Yes. And
like, hey, we're all together here at this thing. And
Right.
that's kind of your versus like a more freestanding,
Yeah.
which you would have been required to do both to one degree or another in most of the locations we've lived and across
and then
adulthood.
combine that with, we had two little ones who I was primarily, taking care of while you worked. And so like the free time was less. And then I would find myself saying, when I did have free time, I have only so much energy. So like, who am I going to give that to and how am I going to use it? And it would be this interesting push and pull between wanting to really have like some close friends that I could go grab a coffee with or something, and wanting to just like have any semblance of an adult conversation, because at that time it was like little babies all the time, right? And so it was such an interesting intersection for me to be in a new city, a new stage of life yet again, and learning new things about myself. And how do you become friends with people, which what I thought was sort of unique to St. Louis in a way that I didn't experience in other places, is a lot of people in St. Louis, like they have lived their whole lives, and maybe they went away.
Done the thing where they
but they've come back, and they have close knit friends that they've had for a very long time, and it was very hard to break into those groups, especially for women. Maybe men are a little bit
wondering
different.
if the people who listen to us, there's a lot of people who are listening to this podcast from St. Louis because they're friends of ours and stuff. I'm wondering if they're either laughing in identification or wagging their head at being frustrated that we get this feedback in St. Louis all the time that we're cliquey, and that you're saying it in a charitable way, but there's definitely something to that. Like there is a sense of, in a way that we don't have to judge it and call it bad. It's just true, guys. I do think that there's a certain closedness to outsiders. So this is a thing.
Yeah, and it was a thing.
Specific to the area. And isn't it interesting that both in Virginia and in St. Louis, we're noting that there are cultural realities that inform how and what and whether and to what extent you're able to get access. But again, I'm also hearing a lot of personal factors about you.
Yes.
The transition, like geographically, the transition in Virginia as far as us being married, then being a new parent, and then also now sort of being a parent of toddler / elementary aged, being in St. Louis, and the interesting cultural things around. It isn't just that people have lived there forever, but they do often come back, and there is a certain tight knitness, and it's all like we all know what the deal is. I'm not sure if these outside people know what the deal is.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot that you're working on, sort of on a interpersonal, developmental, transitional factor, and then I'm kind of still pointing to. I really do remember one thing you didn't say was like, also some of the time you would just get ambivalent about the whole thing, period.
Yeah.
It's like, yes, I do want connection. Yes, I do want adult connection. Yes, I do want, whatever connection with other women and then sometimes it would be like, actually, I think I'm just good.
Yeah.
And I think some of the time is that you just needed some space, period.
Yeah.
To be able to be out and not in and among, like, yes, you want friends sort of like when you want them, but also you're just looking for space and to kind of be an adult in your own head and not attached to and needed by, children and all that. And these are things that we hear in therapy a lot too, reflected from all these little life stations and developmental points that we're sort of glossing over here. We've heard lots of, at least I have in my client work, the similar things. But back to you specifically, you would also get kind of ambivalent about it sometimes. And I think it's, for me, again, some of it would go back to like the work that's required or something. Mm-hmm. And I don't tend to think of it as work because it's very intuitive, but I think you would hear me giving you that reflection.
Yeah.
And, perhaps at times erroneously, like, that it was supposed to be a prescription for you. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, no, this is descriptively what I do, descriptively.
Right. Well,
but
because
I think
I would watch you make new friends, because you're right, you didn't just have the ones that were sort of like built in from living there. You went out and made a new community of friends relatively quickly when we first got there. I mean, some of them you made even before we got there, which I was sort of like, how do you do that?
Sort of connecting with people online through like interest groups and stuff like that. Yeah.
And I think because so much of that was new to me and there was what felt like limited space for me to access that internally at the time, because I was so taxed, I think, being a new mom, doing the things that I was doing, because taking change always takes a minute for me, and we were in a new city and I was trying to acclimate to the weather and like the way that things work and what do I do and what's my schedule need to be. I would see you do it and there was like this envious, like, oh,
yes,
I
felt
want that,
a lot.
right? And then you would say, oh, well, here's how I do it. And then I'd be like, yeah, that seems really overwhelming, right? Like I want something to sort of, I think I reflected a lot on how life was in my 20s and was like, it was always so easy. Why is this so hard? Like this feels harder than it needs to be. And it was often turned as like, I would reflect on myself, oh, there's something wrong with me. Am I doing something wrong? Am I like, or have I not found, what a common phrase in the last few years has been like, find your tribe, right? Like, oh, maybe I just haven't found the tribe of people who think like I do and do what I do. And so it started putting me in these, I started with the energy that I did have, trying to get myself involved in things that did interest me with the hopes that it would like maybe funnel some friends, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of that was teaching dance at the time and at the gym and doing those sorts of fitness activities and trying to connect with people like-minded that way. And that was a very just slow process. Yeah. I did find some friends there. I did have the friendships with the people that you had connected with too, and that was good. And I think I remember towards the end of our time there, when we would come back here to California, I would notice that there would be this sort of part of my personality that would kind of awaken when I would come back here, that would feel like it would go to sleep when I would go back to some of these areas. And I think that was partially related to what Southern California offers you in terms of sunshine and water. And like, I missed being at the beach and I missed being able to be outside, and I knew the things you could do for free and like places I could go that would interest me and those sorts of things. But
what's interesting is none of those, even as you are describing them, at least in my estimation, and then as I've experienced us living in them here, what's fascinating about that is none of those are like a one-to-one with either historically or now with us having a bunch of friends or you having a bunch of friends. It's just that there is a thing that happens for your personality when you come back to this area.
Yeah.
And for your person, maybe is a better way of saying it.
Yeah.
You become, and I'm with you. Again, as you're saying all these things, I'm feeling little like jolts in my stomach each time. Like when you said the envious thing, I remember feeling that way from you and feeling like, oh, it doesn't feel good for you to envy me in this way. Like, it sort of like limited my feelings of you feeling happy for me and then able to join alongside. And you didn't feel that. Like you're I don't know if you're just like not wanting to talk about it, which we don't have to, but like there were also some friendships that I made and some groups that I made friends in that were very hard for you. And there was like one group of friends in particular that were very progressive politically, very intellectually wired, and some of that was who they are, some of it's defense mechanism, but the way that they related was really kind of incompatible for you. Yeah, I see you're having teary eyes over there. Yeah, and we had like a real impasse in that time frame around you feeling like I was connecting with these people and you weren't. And then sometimes I would sort of frustratingly be like, well, come on, like come out, come and like, and some of the things you didn't want to come to because they just like literally did not interest you. And I think even you were frustrated by them.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who were sort of like deconstructing their sort of religious Christian thing and trying to understand who we were now post some of that. And you would kind of get together with those folks and really feel agitated. And I think that particular group of people unconsciously, for the most part, sensed your disequilibrium and felt insecure about it. Yeah. And so sort of like didn't make moves to get to know you better. And also, I think there was some real things going on for you that like, there were certain like developmental things for you that kind of hadn't happened yet or something. But I know that it hurt you. What was happening for you there?
I think it's like, yeah, like I haven't thought
like
about that.
Now, I mean, as you're getting choked up about it, what?
Yeah, I just haven't thought about that in a really long time.
It's a painful period.
And it was, I think, because I was really lonely at that stage because you were working a lot because you needed to provide for us.
Yeah,
and
we started
you were building a business.
Brand new counseling practice.
And
just
I
the
would
one we still own.
Be home with kids, all day. And when I would go out, I was looking to feel the kind of freedom and enjoyment that I felt before kids were there, like I was really like looking to not have to spend a whole lot of time in anything that, I would refer to as like the icky. And sometimes that group of people wanted to bemoan like topics for so long that I'm like, how I felt was that's what they were doing. And I was like, I just want to have a drink and dance and like talk about the Kardashians. I don't know, like which is so opposite of anything they would do, right? And not literally the Kardashians, but you know what I mean.
And the way that you describe them, which I don't, as you saw, I don't necessarily agree with you, but like they would describe what you just said equally uncharitably. They would not have anything positive to say about an orientation to like, there are people who were kind of serious about everything.
Yes.
And, that has its pros and its cons as does but you're right. I'm like, I cannot think of a worse match in that way.
And I mean, and I think that, what I remember around that time was there was like one particular situation where we had gone on a double date and they were talking about things that they had talked to you about a ton that I had actually even heard a fair amount about. And I just couldn't have been less interested in talking about it for the 700th time. And it was like the first night I had been out in like weeks. And I was like, I don't want to talk about this anymore. And you stopped somewhere in the conversation and you sort of said, hey, can we kind of pause on this and bring something in that like Nikki can be a part of this conversation. And I, on one hand, was like, thank God. And then the other sort of felt embarrassed because I was like, it's not that I can't enter into those conversations. It's that I didn't want to.
I didn't always experience you as being able either. I really didn't. Like, you don't agree?
I mean, that sort of goes against what you then said to me later that night on the couch, which was always a really like touching thing for me.
Yeah, I don't think it does go against it, actually. But it's hard to sort of interact with without us sort of going into it. Is that something you're wanting to talk about?
No, I just didn't. I'm not really looking for this to like turn towards like what I like ways in which I'm like Like, I don't know, it sort of just feels like you're saying that there was some fault of mine because of the person that I am, who I am as a person.
Yeah. A few minutes ago, you said that it always just used to feel like I was doing something wrong, and and I'm like, and I do have moments where I'm like, yeah, some of the time I would respond that way because you would be like, how come I don't have this? And I would be like, because you're not doing these things. If I didn't do these things, I wouldn't have them either. Mm-hmm. But when I say it, it's like a device or a tool or a thing that anyone, like a hammer, you can pick up and wield a hammer. And then you would internalize it as, what's wrong with me that I don't have a hammer? And I would be like, and sometimes I would feel caught up in that, like, and it's a thing that happens between us sometimes where like you have a thing and we've talked about this before on the podcast about like, you have a thing that you think about you. Then sometimes I'm like, wait a minute, I don't even think this about you. Why am I interacting in this role with you? Like, I don't think that. I do think you don't do these things. And I do think that you had not thought deeply about, this is what I really meant a moment ago, was like, I don't think you had thought deeply in the way that these folks did, especially, about a great many issues. I also don't think you were interested in it. Those two things can coexist, right? And they inform one another. Yeah. You weren't interested, right. But concurrently, you didn't think deeply about a great many things. And so what I think happened that night was that that's a topic that they felt very passionately about and frankly were quite injured around, which is why they needed to talk about it a lot. Mm-hmm. And I kind of had space for that and had enough felt experience, though our stories were very different, that I could kind of hang and it wasn't disruptive for me to talk about it because I could see that it was doing something for them. You, even in the way you described it a minute ago, you described it very non-charitably. You're like, yeah, God, I can't talk about this for the 700th time. It's like all that juice, you're bringing that to the party, dude. I'm just saying to you, no, I don't think you could talk about some of those things. You hadn't thought deeply about them. I'm not saying anything's wrong with you. To your own point, you weren't interested in them. But when I say that, you say out loud to me, and certainly internally to yourself, there's something wrong with you. Dude, that's not me. That's you. I'm not saying that. And you'll start responding to me as if that's what I'm saying. And you know what happens? After about 10 minutes of that, before I know it, I am saying that. Because I'm saying, well, I definitely don't like the thing you're doing right now. Isn't it possible that you just both couldn't do that because you hadn't thought deeply about those things, and that at least part of that was informed by the additional variable that you weren't interested, and that doesn't constitute something wrong with you?
Yep. I'm just trying to listen to what you have to say. I don't disagree with you that no, I didn't, especially back then, spend much time talking or thinking about that apart from when you and I would talk about it. And
or about a lot of things.
Well, I don't know that I agree about a lot of things. I don't know how you quantify what a lot of things are.
It wasn't like an orientation for you. You were not particularly scholarly or academic. You did not spend lots of time reading non-fictional books. Yeah. You these, and again, if you hear all of those as things you're supposed to be doing, they will sound like insults. I'm like, no, you just weren't doing them. I'm not making any judgment about whether or not you should, but it does have a correlation on how you show up in the world and how you're received as showing up. And to a bunch of people who are insecure and wounded and who both are wired like that and then show up like that partially because they are trying to, cope with their wounds, yes, you will have a very interesting read on them. What I remember saying to you later that night on the couch was, they don't really see you. They see everything through the sieve of their wiring and their wounding. and that they don't really see all the deep, beautiful things that I see about you and that are clearly there to be seen. Like, but for me, which isn't the same thing as saying that there were obstacles in the way. Like a lot of people couldn't see you in that way. It doesn't happen anymore, hardly at all. But I also think you're way easier to see. Like, people don't have to search to find you these days. People can reach out and touch you. And, like, you can come forward with a relatively thought out opinion vis-a-vis this podcast. Like, we couldn't even do this if you didn't have an ability to volley back and forth.
Yeah. I think the other thing that you said that night that always felt relevant to me was you said to me that I can meet them where they are, but they can't meet me where I am. And I always took that as like this really powerful statement, because maybe I was at a place where I wasn't able to think about things deeply or wasn't interested in doing it frequently, because of the other things that were sort of demanding my time and attention and what I felt I had the emotional capacity for at the time. Like, when I can know now when I can look back and see where I was at that state developmentally, I'm like, yeah, I was doing my best at that moment. And it was hard to see the ways in which you could see things in me that you would say, if only you would exercise this, someone might have more access to you. They might know you better. And you might get the very thing that you want. And you would say things like that to me, and I would be like, yeah, I hear you. And also, I don't know how the hell to do that. Like,
yeah. And I would always be like, there's no how the hell, you just do it. Like, there's not
yeah,
it's not
but
like a, it's not entirely fair to you on the one hand. On the other hand, it often is about that straightforward, but
yeah. And it is now in hindsight, I can see how even when I didn't know what I was doing and I was just trying to make any steps
you mean
forward.
The exact same thing that I do.
Yes, but like, I think some of that stuff has always come more natural to you. I think it is a gifting that you have, and it's something that you have practiced.
I am both angered by that and, I sort of appreciate it. I'm like, okay, I'm with you. Maybe I have I'm not trying to say I'm not different, but I'm like, I'm not that different, dude. I'm
not.
also
I don't even think of it as different in the way that you're saying it. I think there are a lot of people who operate like you do. And part of it is you exercised a lot of that even in your younger years with the jobs that you had and the things that you did. Working at Enterprise and doing the things that you did that naturally invoked like that kind of behavior. I just didn't have a lot of that on the front end. And I leaned heavily on the groups that I was connected to find my way through something. And when I didn't have a group that I was connected to anymore, and then it was like, well, who am I? How do I orient? What do I like? Who am I actually going to be friends with? Those were like new questions with lots of new data. And there was a loneliness to that process.
Yeah.
And to find limited hours of the day to try and go and express that, it made it more challenging. I don't think it was until I went to school and started having
back to graduate school.
Yeah, back to graduate school, that I had a connection to people that had nothing to do with anything but what I was doing. And that was what I was longing for.
Yeah, which, to be fair, was your complaint the whole time.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's why when I ask you, what's it like for you here, if we fast forward to moving now to California, what's it like for you to be here where you don't have past connections to lean on? You have found friends through things that you're interested in. And I'm curious, like, what is it like for you, even at this stage, because you're doing it differently than you did.
It feels like there's a lot we're not closing, which is hard for me. Like,
okay.
There's a bunch of open stuff back here that like we're There's like a lot of unpleasantry and all that, which again, by the way, it's really fascinating that that's what we're finding, because that's how I experienced it when we went through it the first time.
Yeah.
If this is the second time, yeah, when we went through it originally, this thing we just went through is about how I experienced it. We're like, suddenly before I knew it, you're saying that I'm saying to you, and I'm like, well, you're not doing things. I don't think the fact that you're not doing them means things about you. Like, I'm not making judgments on those, but you're not doing these things. And I experienced you like you just described, which was spending a lot of time thinking about all of these things, having lots of internal reflections, many of which you felt a great deal of shame around, but not doing some of the basic like requirements that would get you out of that. And it was a real catch-22 for you, right? You wanted this, the things that were required to get that, per me at least, were very foreign to you. You have lots of reasons they were foreign to you. You hadn't done X, Y, and Z. You hadn't been exposed to certain things, but they were nonetheless still the things required. And then to one degree or another, I don't think you accepted that answer. To the degree that you did, you felt you had limited emotional capacity. And I'm with you. I also concur that you started to experience yourself differently, getting your master's degree, in counseling, and then, the parentheses, becoming a therapist, later on. That was one of the best things you ever did for you. And it was a way for you to like remember some things about you that you always wanted me, and I think others, to affirm, but you had to believe them and like live them, and then others could affirm them.
Yeah.
But like when we would, and you remember how often how often will we go back and forth about like, you'd be like, like a basic difficulty with us. It's like, can't you just say this? And I would be like, yes, as soon as I see it.
Yeah.
Yes. And you'd be like, no, but and it was hard because you really did need something there that I was not able to give to you.
Yep.
And you knew how lovely it feels when I do give a gift like that,
Mm-hmm.
and you wanted it so bad. But I was like, babe, you're asking me to like, and it's the thing that we said a couple of episodes back. I'm like, dude, I said something about like being truthful is such a, like, true to my experience is such a true north for me. So it's hard for me to leave all of this. Like, is there anything we need to say to package that up? That I said what I needed to say just there. I love you. I'm sorry. I don't like, I don't want to keep talking. I asked you. I see that you as we talked about this, you re-experienced that hurt again. And I re-experienced feeling both like frustrated with you, confused and almost frightened, and then angry that I'm being thought of as saying something to you that I am not trying to say. And then when I kind of get past that, I feel the same way I feel, which was compassion and understanding.
I mean, I don't think I have like something that I need to do to package it up. I really do hear, and I did hear it then, like your perspective and what you were trying to like beckon me into, like, and I always appreciated that. And then there was, even to sort of use your example here at the end, there was always something I was looking for. And part of that conversation that we would have is that because you can't give it to me, I needed to find the places that could give it to me. And going back to graduate school did offer that to me. It did offer me like the thing that I needed, which was I could be good at something other than just being a mom or just being, which like I hear that sentence now and I'm like, what do you mean? That's like I love it so much, but there was an emptiness.
Well, you love
in
what
me.
so much?
I love being a mom. I love being a wife, but there was something in having that be my only thing that was happening in the world. And that I was struggling so hard to create something else for myself, even just in friendships. Like it was so hard to sit in that like loneliness and that like foreign territory. That like when I tried to express it, even now I can feel like, gosh, I can really feel how sad she was. Like, And I haven't felt that way in a really long time. Like,
Yeah, I don't think you feel that way like
I don't feel
in
that way
real
at
time
all.
anymore at all.
No, no. But gosh, man, I can just like, wow, like just remembering it, I was like, oh gosh, yeah, she was really sad. She was really sad and she was really lonely. And if that was because she didn't think about things or she didn't intentionally reach out to people, or if there's all kinds of things that I could have done that would have made that easier for me, nonetheless, I wasn't and I didn't do those things. And I can feel how sad I was because of that. And I'm glad that that's not the case anymore. I mean, I really, truly haven't felt that way in such a long time. But it does feel like, oh gosh. Oh yeah, she's still sad. She's still sad. And I don't need to like make that be anything other than what it was. It was sad. It was a sad time for me. I'm glad that we would have these like back and forths. I'm glad you did sort of like say the things you did and helped push me forward into some of that stuff. Because I don't think I'd be here with years of not feeling that way had you not.
No, which was always my frustration point. It was like less about being sort of interpersonally frustrated with you as if that's the thing to attend to is my frustration. It's more like, no, I'm frustrated because I mean, I was even confused on the origin point of like, where did you start asking yourself, is the only thing I am is a mom but I know how common of a refrain that is for young moms.
Yeah.
I mean, no doubt anybody who's listening to this that's been in your shoes will be like, oh my gosh, I felt this way, lots of people it resonates with. I've just heard it so many times from women who are clients. But that I think I knew you needed to go out and experience more things. And I think the frustration was that I'm like, what do you want to do? Like, I was not a husband who was like, no, you need, I'm like, what's
not at all.
Let's go do it.
Yes.
When it was the dance stuff, I tried to get you to start a business
100%.
behind it. Let's go do it.
Yes.
We were looking at, we went and looked at spaces to rent and we created a logo and like, let's go do it. And then you backed out of that, which I think was the right move. But it's like, I always but this is where the Henri Nouwen thing, it is hard to be compassionate. This is the quote: compassion requires the inner disposition to go with others to the place that they are lonely, vulnerable, weak, and broken. But this is not our spontaneous response to suffering, still quoting here. What we desire most is to do away with suffering or to find a quick cure for it. As busy, active, relevant people, we want to earn our bread, which means first and foremost doing something to show that our presence has made a difference. But in so doing, still quoting, we ignore our greatest gift, which is our ability to enter into solidarity with those who are suffering. Those who can sit in silence with their fellow man, not knowing what to say, but knowing that they should be there, can bring new life into a dying heart. Those who are not afraid to hold a hand in gratitude, to shed tears in grief, or to let a sigh of distress arise straight from the heart, can break through paralyzing boundaries and witness the birth of a new fellowship, the fellowship of the broken. And it's hard in this relationship, and in that way, I did not want to be broken with you. I did not want to experience that form of brokenness. Not broken like you're bad and need fixing, but brokenness like there's a fracture here for you. There's a sadness. There was something about that I was unable to give you, and I do. It was very real. I did not have it to give to you.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to say it's not regret, but I'm aware of the sadness of that time period, and I'm sorry that I could not give you. I was trying to give you the only gift that I could give you, which is like an encouragement to go out and do something and the willingness to foot the bill.
Yeah.
And to get out of the way.
You did. You gave that wholeheartedly. I never didn't feel that support there.
But I'm sorry I couldn't give you the other thing.
Well, I mean, I don't feel sorry about it. I feel like it was hard to not be able to get it from you, that there was sadness there. But I'm also like, I'm like thankful for it now, because I'm like, but if it would have been like you gave that to me, and maybe I didn't go on the path that I went on to get myself here. A lot of what you offered me was the strength behind finding my own ability to do things for myself that I often tried to farm out to others.
Yeah.
And I don't do that anymore. And that is a fucking gift that I would not want to trade in. So
yeah, well said. And that's a real experience that I have of you. That's you're not the same person. I hate it that we had to go experience all of that to, like, even now, like, to in the retelling of it to try to, but I guess that's still sitting right there anytime we'd like to go touch it.
It sure is. It sure is.
So I guess to like finally answer the question you asked, you've asked it like 3 times.
In the middle.
At least one middle and maybe 2 middles. Oh, I'm good. I'm fine. That's literally generally.
Fuck you.
It is. That's how
Of course you are. Big thumbs up. All right, great.
I'm serious.
No, not an ounce of a struggle for you to find adult friends at this stage here in this new place. There's nothing for you that you've been like, wow, this is not as easy. Or, I mean, maybe you're not looking for them. Maybe you don't want them. I haven't even asked you that.
It's all of the above. I would not call it struggle because I do not experience myself as needy.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm not looking for much, and therefore when I run into things that might, if I was really knotted up on it, might look like obstacles or impasses or points of tension, I just don't have enough drive behind it to empower that to become an actual thing.
Yeah.
Secondly, I do really feel supported by some of the friends that we've made through our like greater yoga breathwork community. To the extent that I need it, they provide it. There is some frustration with previous templates that I have about how you get close to people, some of which I held out to you as, again, I do think, and I was thinking this earlier, by the way, I can also say that I'm sorry that I would present it prescriptively to you. I don't think some of those things work as well with the community that I have currently. I think people are comfortable at one level of closeness or depth or intimacy and whatever the required counterparts are that to like how often they feel the need to maintain that connection. And I'm like, oh, I get it. For you, the level of intimacy or friendship we have currently is satisfactory. And for you to do any more than that feels like a chore, feels like more effort than you're willing to put out. But I can appreciate that for whatever the reason is. And I don't think it has much to do with me. Or maybe it does have to do with me, and I don't really give a fuck about that either. Maybe you don't actually like me that much. Yeah. And I think unless I am just really knotted up about it, which just hasn't happened since we've been here. So no, I wouldn't call it struggle because it's not informed by a big need. I do think sometimes the templates I have don't work as well here, but I don't have much wounding here, so I'm not like thinking of those things as like really somehow being about me.
Yeah. And
maybe the last thing to note is one of my best friends.
Yeah.
The guy that was the best man at my wedding.
How'd you work that out yet again? I
didn't say it. He moved here. Like, we moved here in June of 23, and he moved here June of like 24, right?
Yeah.
So one of the best man for my wedding, friend and mentor of mine, the guy actually that I mentioned earlier that we used to own a counseling practice together in Virginia, he now lives here.
Yeah.
And so I have him. There are a few people in my periphery currently that I wish I could spend more time with. I'm thinking of 2 people in particular. One is a woman and one is a man.
Yeah.
But both of them are in their own places with their ability to move any more proximal, any more concentric circles toward me.
Yeah.
Or I toward them. That's at least how I experience them. And I love them both very much. I feel I love both of them. I could get choked up like just thinking about how much I love them, and I don't even fully understand why. Something about both of them I resonate with very deeply.
Yeah.
I wish I could be closer, but I also respect their distance.
Yeah.
And I don't need anything from them. And I don't find that I am laying up at night longing or pining. And some of that is informed by the fact that in March of this year, I'll be 46 and I don't have the energy I once did.
Yeah.
And there's something about that that's like the gift of aging.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I might have wanted this 10 years ago. I ain't got the energy to.
Remember what the comedian said at 40? No, I'm just not going to
exactly.
go.
Yeah, no, I don't think I'm going to come. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cheers. Thanks for making through the whole conversation with me. I'm sorry that it got tense. I really was re-experiencing, and I think you were too, where we were back then.
Yeah. It's okay. Thanks for sitting with me.
Welcome.
Thanks
Love
for
you.
loving me.
Love you.
Colin Robinson.
Not by
The nighttime sky, I'm by your side.